August 2nd, 2006, Ramadi, Iraq, a day where everything came down to seconds, and one Navy SEAL put himself on the line time and time again to save his brothers. They were clearing a block controlled by hardened insurgents, fighters who knew the terrain, the rooftops, the alleys, and who waited patiently until the Americans were trapped out in the open. And when the ambush hit, it hit like a hammer. A wounded teammate, a pinned down assault element, an enemy machine gunner locking the whole platoon in place. And one U.S. Navy SEAL, Mark Allen Lee, stepping out into the line of fire again and again, knowing exactly what he was risking and doing it anyway.
Behind that wall over there! Where at? To the east! To the east! 200 meters! 200 meters!
Before the chaos of Ramadi, there was Mark Allen Lee, not a legend yet, just a kid from Oregon with a stubborn backbone, a loud laugh, and a habit of stepping up when things got hard. He wasn't born into the teams, he fought his way there. A former soccer player, a fighter, a guy who pushed himself until every weakness cracked and fell away. Buds didn't break him, Hell Week didn't slow him down. He carved his place in SEAL Team 3 with grit, discipline, and a willingness to do miserable jobs without complaint. To the guys in his platoon, Mark wasn't the loudest or the flashiest. He was the steady one, rock solid under pressure, zero ego. A teammate you trusted because he never hesitated when it mattered. By 2006, he was a part of Task Unit Bruiser, one of the most effective, aggressive, and battle-proven special operations units fighting in Iraq. It was the legendary task unit led by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, the same one grinding day after day in the most violent city in the world at the time. Mark wasn't there for glory, he was there because American soldiers and Marines were dying in that city every day, and the only way to change that was to fight street by street, rooftop by rooftop, block by block. In Ramadi, Mark had done it all. He carried a Mark 11 sniper rifle on Overwatch missions, he kicked down doors as a breacher, he ran point when the platoon needed someone to step into the unknown first. Whatever the job was, Mark took it, not because he had something to prove, but because it needed to be done. His teammates knew exactly who he was, a protector, a workhorse, a man who made everyone around him better. And on August 2nd, 2006, that reputation was tested in a way no one expected, inside the narrow, dust-choked streets of south-central Ramadi, where a fortified enemy cell had been waiting for a chance to kill Americans. Mark wasn't supposed to become the story of that day, but within minutes, his actions became the reason several of his brothers lived. Ramadi in the summer of 2006 wasn't just dangerous, it was a grinding, day-to-day fight for survival. IED craters cut through every street, burned out cars sat like rusted skeletons, and every alley, rooftop, and shadow was a possible firing position. Task Unit Bruiser operated here constantly, locking down neighborhoods so Army and Marine units could take and hold ground. It was slow, dangerous, and violent work. On August 2nd, the mission was straightforward on paper. Support an Army element clearing the J Block, a cluster of dense buildings where insurgent fighters had been slipping in and out, using the area to stage ambushes and mortar attacks. The Navy SEALs were there as a direct action support element, backing up the soldiers, taking rooftops, providing precision fire, and being the hammer if something went wrong. Mark rolled out with his platoon in armored Humvees, moving southwest toward the target area. The convoy pushed through the tight streets, dust whipping through the open doors, radios crackling with movement updates. Even before they reached the block, everyone felt it. Overwhelming tension, the heaviness in the air, the kind that meant the enemy was was close. The soldiers began clearing the first set of buildings while the Navy SEALs took up supporting positions around the perimeter. Mark moved in with the assault element, flowing through doorways and broken courtyards, eyes scanning every window frame. The enemy had fought hard here before. They'd fled, regrouped, and were itching for another fight. Inside the block, the environment tightened around them. Narrow stairwells, long hallways with blown out plaster, rooftops connected by shaky planks and exposed rebar. Exactly the kind of terrain an insurgent could use to pin down an entire platoon. But for a while, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The Army element called for the Navy SEALs to shift positions to support the next set of buildings, deeper into enemy territory. This meant crossing open ground between structures, a dead space the insurgents had used before to trap American forces. Mark moved into position near a doorway on the south side of the block, guiding his teammates across the gap one by one. The last man stepped off, and that's when all hell broke loose. A burst of PKM fire echoed across the clearing, heavy caliber rounds slamming into the walls, kicking up dust, ripping into the doorway Mark was covering. The enemy had been waiting patiently. They'd set up the perfect kill zone, and the Americans had just walked straight into it. The first burst of PKM fire was so violent it shook the entire building. The sound was deafening, that deep, ripping thump of a belt-fed machine gun firing from close range. Rounds punched into the wall inches from Mark's head, showering him with dust and broken plaster. The enemy had perfect fields of fire, elevated position, pre-sighted angles. They had waited until the Americans were exposed, and now they were pouring fire directly into the choke point. The Army element across the courtyard hit the deck immediately, completely pinned down. Two soldiers were trapped behind a low wall, unable to move without being cut down. The Navy SEALs inside the building behind Mark couldn't push forward. The machine gun had them locked in place. If someone didn't break the ambush, they were going to start taking casualties fast. And as always, Mark didn't hesitate. He swung out into the doorway, leaning into the gunfire, and sent a burst of accurate fire toward the rooftop where the PKM was firing. He didn't have cover or concealment, just a splintered door frame and the will to stand in the line of fire. Enemy rounds cracked past his face. Chunks of concrete exploded all around him, but he held his ground. Thanks to Mark, his teammates inside the building were able to reposition deeper into the hallway, break the angle, and prepare to push out against the enemy. The PKM shifted its fire towards Mark, the insurgent gunner recognizing the biggest threat in the fight, but Mark didn't pull back. Instead, he stepped further into the doorway, deliberately exposing himself so the gunner would keep aiming at him instead of the soldiers pinned down out in the open. He put accurate rounds right on the enemy PKM nest, forcing the PKM team to duck for cover, just long enough for the two soldiers to sprint across the open ground into cover. That move saved their lives. But the ambushers didn't like that one bit. More enemy fighters appeared in the windows across the block, RPG teams shifting into position, muzzle flashes appearing in the darkened rooms. The insurgents were trying to collapse the entire American formation by overwhelming them quickly. The platoon commander shouted for the Navy SEALs to push up and break the ambush. Mark reloaded, wiped plastered dust from his face, and moved without waiting for an order. He slid along the wall, weapon up, eyes locked onto the rooftop where the PKM was now reloading. He could see the glint of the ammo belt, the silhouette of the gunner leaning behind cover. Mark fired again, controlled, precise, and forced the gunner to drop back. That tiny window of suppression let the rest of the assault element pour out of the building and get into alternate firing positions. It shattered the insurgents' perfect kill zone. But the fight was nowhere near over. As the SEALs split into two teams to flank the enemy, a new call came over the radio. One of the soldiers had taken a round during the opening burst. He was bleeding badly. Multiple medics rushed towards the wounded soldier's position to try to stabilize him. But the enemy realized it and immediately shifted fire toward the building where the wounded soldier was being treated. In an instant, the pressure on that building tripled, and Mark once again didn't hesitate. He sprinted across a debris-filled hallway, took up a firing stance at a blown-out window, and unleashed another volley, drawing the enemy's fire away from the medics inside and onto him. Rounds ripped past him yet again, glass shattered, fragments cut through his arms, but he stayed in the window and stayed firing. He stayed blocking the enemy's line of sight to the wounded man. This was Mark's second major stand of the day, the moment where he refused to move, refused to hide, and refused to give the enemy a single angle on his brothers. And once again, it worked. The team was able to stabilize the wounded soldier and prepare him for evacuation, but the enemy wasn't done yet. Insurgent fighters started maneuvering, moving across rooftops, creeping along alleys, trying to get elevation on the Americans. The fight was expanding in every direction, a three-dimensional urban battle, and the only way to regain control was to take the high ground. The platoon commander gave the next order: "We're going to take the roof." Mark nodded, no hesitation once again. He knew exactly what that meant. They were about to climb straight into the teeth of the enemy's fire, and Mark would be the first one up the ladder. In urban combat, rooftops are everything. High ground means visibility. Visibility means control, but it also means exposure. Anyone up there became a silhouette, an easy target for every rifle, every PKM, every hidden shooter in the city. Mark knew that. Everyone did. But the wounded soldier inside the building needed to be evacuated. The enemy was closing in tight, and the only way to regain momentum was to put shooters above the insurgents and dominate the block from the top down. I'm sure you're beginning to see a pattern here, but again, without hesitation, Mark volunteered immediately. He grabbed the ladder frame, slung his rifle, and started climbing. Bullets were cracking overhead, slamming into the walls, punching chips of concrete onto the sills below. Enemy fighters had already maneuvered onto surrounding rooftops, waiting for the Americans to expose themselves again. But Mark climbed anyway. As he crested over the rooftop, he didn't hesitate. He didn't duck. He didn't crawl along the roof. He immediately got onto his feet and into the fight. The enemy opened up in an instant. Multiple muzzle flashes burst from two adjacent rooftops. A PKM down the block swung its barrel in his direction. An insurgent on a stairwell popped shots from a dark, shadowed doorframe. Mark planted his feet, squared up, and answered with controlled fire. Fast, accurate, and furious. He wasn't just returning fire, he was drowning it. Behind him, the rest of the sills were still climbing, bottlenecked on the ladder. If the enemy caught them halfway up, they'd be shot before they even reached the roof. Mark realized that and chose to make himself the biggest target for the enemy to protect his brothers on the ladder. He shifted to the left flank, firing at a rooftop gunner sending tracers across the block. He then shifted to the right, cutting off another fighter trying to push to a firing position. Rounds snapped past him. One tore across the rooftop, sparking off a rusted air duct behind him, but he kept on shooting. Mike Mansour was the next man up, dropping into a supporting position, returning fire from a lower crouch. Mark pushed further into the open, absorbing the enemy's full focus. He called out enemy positions to his brothers as he continued to lay down fire. Every shot he fired bought seconds. Seconds for the medic team preparing the casualty downstairs. Seconds for the SEALs behind him to get onto the roof and into cover. Seconds that meant survival. The enemy pressure intensified. More fighters poured into the fight, shifting buildings, crossing alleys, and coordinating fire in a way that showed they knew the terrain by heart. Mark adjusted his stance, rolled to another fighting position, and began suppressing a PKM team 3 buildings over. And that's when it happened. A single enemy round struck him during the exchange, a precise shot from one of the rooftop gunmen he'd been holding back. Mark collapsed where he stood, his weapon falling across his chest. The SEALs surged forward immediately. Mansour moved to cover him, others laying down blistering fire to keep the enemy back. But the damage was catastrophic. Mark had taken the brunt of the enemy's fire so others wouldn't have to, and in doing so, he had saved them. Below them, the wounded soldier was carried out to the evacuation point. Above, the Navy SEALs fought with a fury that pushed the insurgents back and secured the rooftops. The Americans survived that day because Mark Lee made a choice again and again to put himself between the enemy and his brothers. And he paid for it with everything he had. Mark Allen Lee became the first Navy SEAL killed in the Battle of Ramadi, but what he did in those final moments is why several of his brothers lived. When the fight was finally over, the smoke settled across the rooftops of Ramadi like a heavy curtain. Spent brass rolled in the dust, broken concrete crumbled under every boot step, and the SEALs gathered around the spot where their brother had made his last stand. They carried Mark Lee off that rooftop with the same intensity he had carried into the fight. Steady, deliberate, protective. Nobody spoke. There were no words big enough for that moment. The wounded soldier Mark had shielded survived. The men he drew fire away from also survived. And a platoon that would have been pinned down and cut apart lived because Mark refused to hide from an enemy intent on killing his brothers. The news spread fast through Task Unit Bruiser. Even in a place as violent as Ramadi, Mark's actions hit everyone hard. He wasn't just another operator, he was the teammate who cracked jokes in the Humvee, who pushed those around him in training, who shouldered the load without ever asking for anything back. He was the guy who stepped forward when others stepped back. The guy you trusted with your life. At his memorial service in Iraq, his teammates spoke about courage, real courage. Not the kind in movies, not the kind in stories, but the kind that happens in a split-second decision, under gunfire, when nobody is watching, and when the price is heavy. Mark Lee received the Silver Star, a Bronze Star with Valor, and the Purple Heart for his actions on August 2nd, 2006. But medals only tell part of the story. The rest is written in the lives he's saved, in the teammates who came home because he stood out in the open on their behalf, in the legacy he left behind, a legacy of service, sacrifice, and the kind of courage that defines the very best of the SEAL teams. Today, his name is spoken with absolute respect inside the community. His story is taught to new operators, and every year men and women from across the military honor him, not because of how he died, but because of how he lived. Mark Allen Lee was 28 years old, a brother, a warrior, a protector, and on a rooftop in Ramadi, he showed the world exactly what U.S. Navy SEALs are made of. Heroes like Mark Lee don't fade. Their courage echoes through every man they fought beside and every story we carry forward. And that's our mission here on this channel, to carry their stories forward until our dying breath. If this story hit you, if you felt what these SEALs lived through, then don't stop here. Click on this next video on your screen now. It's another real moment where a Navy SEAL stepped into danger so others could make it home, and it deserves to be remembered just as much as this one.